All right, so welcome to CFR Office Hours. Today's January 23rd, 2023. We're holding these office hours so we can answer any questions that we have from our providers who are joining us. And really what we want to do before we get to the questions is to give folks an overview of the CFR process and then what the decision-making priorities for the Knowing Steering Committee were and how they landed on the recommendations for LA4, NSECD, and B3, and then how they landed on the actual allocations for city seats.
Okay.
So the CFR stands for Coordinated Funding Request. It's an annual process that NOEN, which is the New Orleans Early Education Network, conducts on behalf of all publicly funded birth through 5 programs in Orleans Parish. And that is for the LA4 program, like I mentioned, NSECD, B3, and city seats. And the goal of the CFR process is to ensure that the limited number of publicly funded seats are equitably distributed across the program types, which is why there's an application component, because we have fewer seats to allocate to than the number of requests that we have. So a little bit about the timeline. In October of last year, we announced and launched the CFR process. Programs submitted your applications, and then we conducted either interviews and or site visits, depending on the funding stream you're applying to. Starting in November, the CFR evaluation team began to score applications. And then in January, in fact, last week, the evaluation team proposed allocation recommendations to the Knowing Steering Committee. And then last Wednesday, the Knowing Steering Committee voted on those recommendations for LA4 and NSECD B3, because those go to the LGOE and then to Bessie, who has final decision-making on those. And then for city seats, the Knowing Steering Committee has final decision-making on those. So the Knowing Steering Committee approved the city seats allocations. So what that means is LA4, NSECD, and B3 are only recommendations at this point. LGOE and Bessie will make those decisions by the end of April. And the city seats allocations are final decisions as of now, since the Knowing Steering Committee has power over those. And then, so in April, LA4, NSECD, and B3, you'll get a final recommendation notification once Bessie approves those. And then once we know what the B3 and if the state is going to match the local investment for city seats, likely NOEN will have to do a second round of city seats. So that will be in April.
Okay.
Any questions about timeline before I move on?
No.
All right, I think that's Shannon Jones from the Nest. Welcome, Shannon. And then Ms. McCrae, what is your program?
D&J's Learning Center.
D&J's, gotcha. All right. All right, so we're gonna move on. So we'll give, I'll kind of skip over the application overview because y'all all participated in it, but we sent out applications in October. We had 101 applications. We had our evaluation teams, which were composed of NOLA Public Schools and Agenda for Children staff. And like I said, we did the site visits or the interviews.
Mm-hmm.
This is the number of seats requested. So for city seats in B3, we had almost right under 2,000, and it's broken up there by age group. And then LA4 and NSECD had 2,000 seats requested.
Mm-hmm.
So these numbers are for the 2022-2023 school year, the total number of allocations that the network had. So we had 1,400 LA4, about 380 NSECD, 420 B3. And then these 200 and 200, that's both for city seats. So a total of 400 for city seats. Half of those were funded by a line item in the mayor's office budget. And then the other half were funded through the state match through the Early Childhood Education Fund. Now, one caveat for next year, you're going to see that city seats, so that 400 is going to increase to 1,000. That's because the millage that was passed last year, we began collecting, or the city began collecting those mills in January this month. And by August, whenever those city seats are live, it's going to be 1,000 seats. So a little bit about the CFR and the timeline. So LA4, NSECD, and Beta 3, as we mentioned earlier, those go to the state, and those seats are formally requested through the Super App. And so the Super App is due at the end of this month on January 27th. So there's two components to the Super App. One is NOLA PS is going to submit on behalf of Noeen the Super App for LA4, NSECD, and Beta 3 requesting the seats that were shared with y'all. And then for LA4 providers, you all have an individual component of the Super App, and you should have received an email last week from Wesley Taylor that has screenshots and guidance on what information to put into your Super App application. Anything to add to that, Wesley?
No, Mr. Octave, I just sent that to you and Ms. Watkins, so you should have that in your email.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Let's see. So a little note on Beta 3. So Beta 3, we currently have 420 Beta 3 seats in the city. We are unsure what the status of Beta 3 funding for next year is. So we're still waiting for the state to make that decision and let us know. So how we treated that this year is twofold. One, we made the same requests we did last year for the upcoming year in case the state comes through with the 420 Beta 3. But since the status is unknown at this time, what we did is we protected all current Beta 3 seats in our city seats allocation. And if Beta 3 funds come through, then that's that second round I mentioned earlier. We'll then look at potentially redistributing those city seats. I mentioned that millage funded city seats are locally funded. The Noeen Steering Committee is the one who approves those seats. And our top priority this year was continuity of care for existing students. So that's protecting those Beta 3 seats, as well as making sure that children with city seats this year get them for next year, unless they're aging out. Another unknown at this point is the state matching funds. So the Louisiana Department of Education and the state has a Louisiana Early Childhood Education Fund. So that is a pot of money that gambling revenue, special license plate revenue goes into, as well as special allocations made by the governor, by the legislature. So there's a pool of money that exists. In your folks are only eligible if there is a local investment. And so the state will match that up to dollar for dollar. So we have in New Orleans a $20 million or up to $20 million millage that for the next 20 years. So we have applied for matching funds. We don't know how much we're going to get because that pool of money is limited. So once we find out what our matching number is going to be, again, that's that second round, because that's going to give us more seats. We just don't know what the funding amount and therefore what the number of seats will be at this point. So I jumped ahead a little bit for implications. So I mentioned that since we don't know Beta 3, we're protecting those through the city seats allocation. Seat and funding allocations for children birth to 3 must ensure that existing children can continue to the next age level classroom when available. So that's that continuity of care, making sure that if a child has an infant, a 1 or a 2-year-old seat, that when they're aging up, that they're guaranteed a spot. And again, since Beta 3 and state matching funds have not been determined, we will likely have to do an additional round of seat allocations when we get that information. So a couple considerations that the steering committee made last week. So I mentioned that the number of city seats is growing from 400 to 1,000. So that's an additional 600 seats right there. That required Noeen to consider bringing on new providers. So there were two different types of new providers. One was a currently operating site, but they were just new to city seats because they did not receive city seats funding in the past. So we have a number of those coming on board. And then second, the steering committee decided that brand new sites who were in the process of getting a type 3 center license would be eligible for city seats funding at this point. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We had 7 existing programs come on board that we allocated seats to, and then 3 programs who are currently in the process of obtaining a license we recommended as well. And the reason that we voted on city seats at this point is because we wanted to get those new sites into the common application, the NCAP, so that they can get some visibility by families whenever that launches on February 1st. Recommendations. So Noeen engaged the data center to run some demographic reports last year. And the data center report identified that New Orleans East and the West Bank had a large number of children and families, but a small number of early learning programs. So for our new sites coming on board, we prioritized programs in the East and on the West Bank. And so the criteria for that was the zip code. So for New Orleans East, it was 70126, 70127, 70128, and 70129. And then for the West Bank, it was 70114 and 70131. Now, whenever we're going to break down all 4 different funding streams, there were some caveats to the percentage score for the site visit and application on top of those geographic, those zip codes. Second to last bullet here, the exact funding source for each seat will need to be finalized once all funding sources and amounts are determined. So, like we said, we protected those B to 3 seats in the city seats ask, and if we get more seats, which we hopefully will, then we might need to move some of those around. But at present moment, for the city seats allocation, you can guarantee that number of seats for your program for next year. All right, let me pause real quick before we get into the individual funding streams and see what questions folks might have at this point. All right, we're going to keep rolling. So we're going to first start with LA4, and we'll walk you through the process there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, if you don't have it pulled up already, I'm going to drop in the chat the final recommendations and allocations. So if you click that link in the chat, you will see the 4 different allocation or recommendation documents. And we color coded these to make them a little bit more navigable for folks.
That's just for LA4 or is for NSECD also, sorry.
That link will have, it's a 1 PDF with all 4, so it's 4 pages.
Got you.
Yeah, so we're going to start with LA4, so that's the blue handout or the blue page 1. So a little bit about the CFR, the LA4 context. So all existing programs requesting seats were recommended to receive seats in this round because family demand is there for our existing LA4 providers. Some sites the sites that requested the same number or fewer seats than they currently have, they received that full request if they were mostly able to fill seats. And those were determined in increments of 20, since that's the typical pre-K4 classroom size. Increases or decreases in recommendations compared to the current year, so the 22-23 allocations were based on a review of enrollment and waitlist data, geographic area, impact of reduction in capacity at existing sites, such as closing a classroom or teachers retiring, facility capacity in terms of space to expand, application responses and scores, and then anticipated additional kindergarten seats available for families at the school. For our LA4 recommendations, we wanted to ensure flexibility to convert seats or increase allocations based on enrollment and family needs. So the way that we did that is we recommended that NOLA PS kind of have a general number that they can then allocate throughout the year as needed. So you'll notice on that blue sheet, NOLA Public Schools has a recommendation of 120. So that is to help fill gaps throughout the year. You'll also notice that underneath the total, there are 3 sites listed: Ben Franklin, Alon, and Mary McLeod Bethune. Those 3 have special, those are included in that 120 NOLA Public School ask based on a special LEA that they have. And, and then the last line item here is increasing diversity of programming available and increasing family program choices. So this year we did recommend a new site, Esperanza Charter School, because they are adding a two-way immersion or dual language immersion pre-K4 site. So we wanted to make sure that was available to families. Rebecca or Wesley, do y'all want to add anything to the LA4 narrative here?
I don't have anything unless anybody has questions.
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Happy to answer questions.
Okay, yeah, so we'll open it up to questions. So again, this is for LA4, the blue sheet. In total, we requested 1,434 LA4 seats to the state. We'll know in April on the final decision on that. So any questions about LA4?
No, I'm good.
All right, we will move on to NSECD next. So this is going to be page 2 of that document, the green page or the green handout. All right, so for NSECD funding for next year, all existing programs who requested seats were recommended to receive seats. There's current demand for those programs, and existing sites who requested the same number or fewer seats than they have this year received their full ask if they were mostly able to fill seats. Ooh, sorry about that. There we go. And then this year we were able to bring on 6 new sites, and the recommendations for the 6 new sites to NSECD were these next bullets here. So sites in underserved geographic areas, again, those are those zip codes in New Orleans East and the West Bank, they were recommended if their score was 65% or higher. So if you were in an underserved geographic area and you had 65% or higher, that was the eligibility threshold for receiving an NSECD allocation. Now, sites with a score of 80% or higher, regardless of geography, they were recommended their request. So either 80%, or if you were underserved geography, of 65% in plus geography. So that's how we got those 6 new sites. Bringing on these new sites will allow families to age up to a seat at the same quality center if possible. We're increasing diversity of center/school options offered to families. And then there's a potential to increase pre-K3 seats across the system to meet family need. We know that pre-K3 wait lists are long. So we're with bringing on some new sites, we're hoping to provide more options in the city for families with 3-year-old children. Increases/decreases in recommendations compared to requests were based on a review of enrollment and waitlist data, geographic area, impact of reduction in capacity at existing sites, facility capacity, licensing status, and application responses and scores. So I'm just taking a look myself at these. All right, any questions for NSECD sites? I don't think we had a second one. So we requested a total of 493 NSECD sites. Any questions on those? All right, we'll keep moving. We're officially halfway. So next is B to 3. So birth to 3. That's going to be the third page of the document that I dropped in the chat, the purple page. So as we mentioned earlier, the status of B to 3 funding for the 23-24 school year is still unknown at this point. But in the case that it is available, we made the ask. So if B to 3 funding becomes available, only requests submitted via Super App will be considered by LDOE. So that the purple page there, that's the recommendations that we made. That is the sites and then the number of seats recommended for that site that would go into effect if LDOE approves B to 3. We kept this the same as last year, again, because the funding status is unknown and because we prioritize continuity of care for children in those programs, and we want to ensure that they have a seat in the same place next year. So we recommended 420. And as we mentioned earlier, if B to 3 funding does not come through, we took all 420 and we built those into the city seats ask, which we'll look at in a second. And so all B to 3 420 seats are protected by city seats currently. When B to 3 funding is determined by the state, NOEEN will likely need to revisit the funding and seat allocations to ensure that we maximize family access, minimize vacancies across the system, and remain sensitive to program sustainability. Any questions on B to 3? All right, that's going to take us to city seats, which is the fourth and final page on the allocation document that I put in the chat. It's the orange, it has orange at the top, but you'll also see some green, yellow, and red like a stoplight, because this was our most complex of the 4 asks. So city seats is currently the only guaranteed funding source at this time for children aged birth to 3. Why? Because the NOEEN Steering Committee has the final say on city seats allocations. So we recommended right under 1,000 seats, and those are guaranteed for the sites that are listed on that page. Recommendations ensure students currently served by city seats and B to 3 funding can receive continuity of care agnostic of current funding source. So that's us protecting those B to 3 sites until we know the final status of that funding stream. NOEEN will likely need to revisit funding allocations before next school year, pending the final determination of B to 3 and state match funding, as we've said. An addition of 600 city seats and potential B to 3 and state match funds will require NOEEN to consider expansion of seat allocation to new programs. And this is something that we highlighted for NSECD. If a site, so new sites that are in process of opening but are currently in progress of getting their license, the steering committee decided that they would be included in the allocation recommendation, or final allocations in this case. And just to mention it again, including new sites in the city seats allocation, as well as the other recommendations, and it's ensuring that they're included in the February 1st launch of the NCAP so that families can see those sites whenever they're looking for seats for their children. All right, so there were 4 priorities that we considered when making the decision for city seats allocation. So whenever you're looking at the document, you'll see a couple columns in. It's priority 1, priority 2, priority 3, priority 4, and then the total recommendation. So I'm going to walk you through those 4 priorities and what they mean. So priority number 1 was continuity of care. So existing sites that had either B2 or city seats received their birth to 3-year-old allocations, so that currently funded students who age up at the end of the year will still have a seat at that site, regardless of if they were B2 city seats. And this did take into account 3-year-olds who are aging out of B2 and city seats. So it's for infants aging up, 1s and 2s aging up. So implications of this: all existing sites are allocated seats for their currently enrolled students moving from infant to 1s, 1s to 2s, and 2s to 3s, so children can remain at the same site if that is the family's preference. There was one existing site who was ineligible due to a low performance score, but the steering committee decided that that site would at least be allocated the continuity of care for those children. They just wouldn't receive seats on top of that. And no infant seats are allocated in this priority. So when you think about continuity of care, once an infant ages up to a 1-year-old, those infant seats, they would be filled by new children coming into the system. So we'll get to that in priority 2. So at priority 1, we allocated 527 seats from the 1,000, and then for the next 3 priorities, we'll have 473 seats remaining. Priority 2 is infant care at existing sites. So existing eligible sites are allocated infant seats. Sites are recommended to receive infant allocations equal to the current number of actively enrolled infants at the site, or equal to the site's infant seat request, whichever number was less. So for example, I have a classroom with 4 infants. All my infants age up. I requested 4 infant seats, so steering committee voted to give me 4, unless I asked for fewer than that. Implications of this: if the site has no currently active infant seats and did not request infant seats, the site was allocated 1 infant seat, because in order to receive city seats funding, you have to serve infants. So they're given an infant seat because they have to serve infants. Some sites met their total ask after this priority. And so whenever we get to the priorities 3 and 4, you're going to see that their number goes to 0. That's because their full ask has been made. So that's when you start to see those red boxes with zeros. That means that's because they were, there's that one site that was ineligible, and then all other sites had met their total ask at that point. So after priority 1 and 2, we allocated 617 seats, which leaves us 383 for the next 2 priorities. Priority 3 was to meet the 22-23 allocations for existing providers if requested. So existing B2 and city seats providers, we wanted to make sure that they did not receive fewer seats next year than they currently have, unless they ask for fewer seats. So implications for priority 3: all existing eligible sites receive the full number of seats requested up to the same number that they currently have this year. So we refer to this as making programs whole. So before we allocate any additional or new seats, we want to make sure that our current providers have the same number of seats that they have this year. So that was what priority 3 was. Just like in the last priority, after we allocated that, some sites met their total request after this priority. So then you'll see a few more with the red zeros in priority 4. So after the first 3 priorities, we were at 784 of our 1,000 seats, and we have 216 seats left for our 4th and final priority. And the 4th and final priority was to add new city seats providers, as well as to honor the asks of existing programs if they were greater than their current number. Okay, so increase family access and choice to quality seats by allocating seats to new sites that do not currently receive B2-3 or city seats funding. We prioritize underserved geographic areas. Again, that's New Orleans East and the West Bank by those zip codes that we defined. And also we wanted to prioritize quality programs, and that was determined by a high CFR evaluation score. So what that looks like is sites in underserved geographic areas with a score of 65% or higher, and we're in one of those zip codes, they were eligible for this priority. And any new sites that had a score of 75% or higher, if they were not in an underserved geography, were eligible for a priority 4. Now, we could not, since we only had 216 sites for this priority, not everybody can get their full ask there. So in order to make an equitable recommendation, what we calculated was 25% of the ask for these sites would then be underneath that 217 remaining seats. So if you met the eligibility threshold, you received 25% of your total ask. And so that way we could bring on more providers that way. Available seats after this priority. So that left us with roughly like 21 seats. So those seats are going to be saved, just like for LA4, NOLA PS has 120 seats to, kind of as flex seats throughout the year. We're retaining those 21 seats to kind of fill in the gaps wherever those might exist throughout the year. So implications for priority 4, we increase family access to sites and seats. Seats are added, not just converted from one funding source to another. We were able to bring on 600 new seats with this. All right, so I will pause there because that is the end of the slide deck, and see what questions you have about city seats allocations or about the CFR process or anything else in general.
Hi, Mr. Derrick, this is Pam with Shallow Gardens. Could you explain priority 4 to me again? I didn't quite get the entire analogy.
Yeah, so after priority 3, all of our existing providers for B2-3 and city seats were made whole. So if you were an existing provider, which I believe y'all were, you received the same number of seats as you had last year, unless you asked for less. So for priority 4, we brought on new providers, and for our existing providers, we gave 25% of your remaining ask. So for Shiloh Gardens, let's see if we can use a real life example. Y'all have 35 this year, and then y'all asked for 42. So after priority 3, y'all met that 35. But since y'all asked for 42 in priority 4, we gave y'all 25% of the remaining ask, which is 5 for y'all. No,
1. It's a 1 on ours.
Yeah. So y'all received a total of 36. Yeah, because basically, so this was the trickiest one because we had, so many asks, but we wanted to. The reason we did the 25% is that was the percent at which we could bring in those new providers and give existing providers additional seats.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right. 2 things to reiterate real quick. Oh, somebody had a question. Oh, that's a walkie-talkie.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Shannon.
When I was reviewing the NSECD results, I had trouble with trying to, because I wanted to really see how we did, like with the raw score versus the weighted percentage and stuff, and I had difficulty with trying to figure all of that out. How can I figure all of that out?
So on the city seats allocation, it has the raw score and the weighted percentage. Are you like looking for like feedback on what wasn't what you didn't score as highly on? Is that what you're
Yeah,
asking?
like just as a way to improve for the next time and stuff.
Yeah. So I would if you can send an email to cfr@noeen.org,
Mhm.
then we can get some feedback. That was something that was highlighted last time that we would like to do. But I'm gonna drop that in the chat, cfr@noeen.org, just to ask, for a little bit of feedback on there.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah. So two things I want to highlight again. Number one is that this, especially for city seats, this is our initial initial allocation. Once we hear back from the state about B2 and city seats, we're going to have a second round. So you're going to get at least that number of seats, but we might have, we at this time don't know how many are B2 and how many are city seats because we're still waiting to hear back. And then again, I'm reading some sticky notes to make sure we good. Printing it now. Yeah, and again for these seats, the NCAP launches in February, so these seats are going to be reflected in that, and we'll once they're in, then we'll be able to track waitlist data, and then that'll potentially inform decisions we make for that second round of B2 and city seats allocations. Any other questions? All right, if there are no questions right now, I will conclude the office hours for today. But should you have any questions moving forward, you can always email cfr@noeen.org. That's the email address I put in the chat, and we will get back to you as quickly as we can with an answer to your question. All right, I want to thank you for your time today and for the good work that you do for the children and families of our city. Thank you.
Thank you.